Welcome everyone to the last afternoon session of Hands-on Agile 2025. We have 4 exciting talks, starting with Maarten Dalmijn and the 5 obstacles to empower teams. Just in case you can't categorize that, if you are into the product operating model, empowered teams are actually a critical success factor. So if you want to help your organization fail at this, you may listen very carefully here because there might be some good tips and tricks, right, Maarten? So, stage is yours, please.
Hello. So I'm going to talk about a very exciting topic, the 5 obstacles to empower a team, aka how you can deliver twice the value in half the time. So before we start, maybe it's good to ask some questions, and you can just write in the chat because I want to keep the flow going. So who has ever joined a company and felt incredibly disappointed? It can be your current company, I hope not. Can be a company in the past. So just share like, hey, I relate to this. This has happened to me. It has definitely happened to me. I've joined companies where I was like, why did I sign up for this? Like, what did I even sign up for? I didn't know this. And maybe another question to get the brains flowing. Whoever felt joining a company, if only they let me do my real job, like if only they let me do my job, like you're just so busy with all this other distracting stuff that you don't have time to do the stuff that matters. I've been there as well. I cannot see the chat messages, right? But I'm assuming this sounds very recognizable. At least when I have drink with my buddies, they talk about this all the time. And yeah, so who's ever worked somewhere where they're so busy all the time, distracted, like they feel like you're busy completing all these side quests, but you're not doing the stuff that's really going to make a difference. Does this all sound familiar? So this is actually what we're going to be talking about today. Why does this happen? I'm going to try to explain why this happens. So my realization is because I'm working with companies all over the world and I'm at conferences and I speak to the brightest people like in product management and agile, and they talk about all the books they've read, all the models they know, and my realization over time has been expertise isn't the solution. We don't need more expertise. I mean, of course, it's nice, right? But I don't think that's where the bottleneck lies. And I actually think the biggest realization I had, so I have a lot of friends that are looking for product management jobs, and they're completing all these case studies. And these case studies are actually pretty impressive. Like they're like, oh, if that was the job, if those companies would be half as good as product management as in those case studies, then actually we'll be seeing far better products. But we're not. There are a lot of ineffective and bad product out there. So this is kind of how I would like to visualize it. In job interviews, you do these crazy case studies, and maybe a nice comparison would be like they ask you, how good are you at wrestling with bears? How many years of experience do you have wrestling with bears? What is the biggest bear you've wrestled with? That's kind of like what it feels like. So when you join a company, you're like, awesome, I'm going to wrestle with bears. I'm good at wrestling with bears. But then you join, you're like, what the hell's going on? There's King Kong, there's Godzilla, like they're fighting together and you're stuck in between and you're like, I didn't sign up for this. So why does this happen? Why is there this huge delta between the theory as described in the product management books and the reality of doing the actual job? And yeah, so this is actually what we're going to talk about. Why is there this massive delta, this massive difference between interviewing for the job and doing the actual job? So I worked at many different companies, and actually, for some reason, I always became known as the fixer, right? So there was a team that wasn't performing, and they were like, okay, give it to Maarten. Maarten will find a way to make it work. Not because I'm so smart, but because I just like bringing the best out in people and not telling them what to do. And apparently it works. So my superpower is helping struggling teams to perform better. So I kind of made a model that you can use to help teams with that. So before we start talking about the model, this is just a very simple visualization, right? Teams do work, and that work, whether it's features or whatever it is, hopefully produces the results we want. It's a very simple linear model. As we know, the reality stretches, and this is kind of the problem, right? So we have got this huge delta, this huge block in the middle, and we need to do all these workarounds, all these detours to ultimately get the results we want. And today I will be talking about a model I've created, which can help you in your organization to help this delta visible. So the difference between the things you would like to work on and what you are actually currently working on. And I call it the 5 obstacles to high performing teams or empowered teams, however you want to call it. So the sad reality is we've got all these disempowered teams. So these are teams that are given features to build that management asks for because someone thinks it's a bad idea. And the reality is we would like to have empowered teams, right? But before we talk about empowered teams, so if you look at this, maybe write in the chat, who is responsible for all the special effects in these scenes? Does anybody know? So you see Darth Vader with a lightsaber, T-Rex, Terminator 2, Forrest Gump. So it's actually the Industrial Light and Magic, so the company behind Star Wars. So maybe a fun story. So George Lucas wanted to make Star Wars. So he actually spoke to special effects companies, and he had like a vision. I want to have like a movie like Kubrick's A Space Odyssey, but with fast-moving spacecraft. And he went to all the special effects companies, and they all said, yeah, we can't do that. So you know what he did? He started his own company, and that's Industrial Light and Magic. And so what's very nice, there's this very nice documentary, and it shows you that how they came up with all the special effects for Star Wars, and it's just a beautiful example of an empowered teams, because nobody knew how to do the things they were doing. So nobody could tell them what to do, right? So empowered teams, very simply, are teams that are given important problems to solve, and they have the freedom to figure them out, to serve their customers, and in a way that also works for the business. So both the value creation and the value capture. So I will now explain the model, and I will start at the top, and it's visualized as a pyramid, but think of it as a delta, because that's what it is. It's just the difference between how you're currently doing things and the things you want to be doing. And I'm going to start at the top, so it's maybe a little bit strange, but the top is more like the team level, and as we go down, we'll go more into the organization level, the foundation. So here's the simple picture again. You have a team, they do work, and hopefully they produce the results we want. But we all know this is a lie, right? Because actually it's far more, because the results we want features, but we also want to create value, and we want to create business value. So, and that's all highly context independent. It all depends on what you're doing. If you're developing an e-commerce website, you know, it's very far easier to tie it to money. But if you're, let's say, working on Slack, it's much more difficult to directly tie your features to money. It's not linear, but it's extremely messy, right? We all know this. So the team encounters all these obstacles in the work, and then when they deliver the work, there's not the results we want, and that really makes our life difficult. And now I'm going to talk about this first obstacle. So the first obstacle, which I've seen with teams all over the world, is missing context. So basically, you open up Jira, you look at a story, and you see that the goal of the work is to finish the work, because there is no goal. They just describe what they're doing. So they're just describing the work. And as you can see, all hope is lost to get the results you want. So that's the first obstacle. And then you can actually pretty easily fix that on the team level, but it's very common at corporates, at startups, at scale-ups. So how do you notice this? Well, by looking at Jira, but what you will see, teams are given features to deliver. They are very much thinking about how it works, the solution. They only care about the outputs, the features, and they don't really understand why they're delivering these features. They don't really understand how they're creating value for the business. They don't understand how they're making money, creating value for the customer. They don't understand how they're creating value for the business. And here's maybe a nice real world example to explain this really well, why it's so important to not just work on solutions, but to start with problems. So why do elevators have mirrors? Please write your answer in the comments. Why do elevators have mirrors? There are many different reasons you could think of, but basically at one point in time, somewhere in the 30s, nobody had elevators with mirrors. And then at a later point in time, they suddenly started adding mirrors to elevators. And why do you think that is? So what actually happened is, so this was a hotel in New York, and there was they had an elevator. It was too slow, and customers kept complaining about it. And they had already talked about it many times before. Fixing it would cost millions. So making the elevator faster was not a viable solution. But then, in one of these meetings where they were again discussing these complaints and everybody was frustrated, there was a psychology major sitting in the room. And he or she said, or they said, what if the problem isn't that the elevator is too slow, but what if we reframe the problem to be waiting for the elevator is boring? And if you reframe the problem that waiting for the elevator, then there suddenly are all these viable solutions. So you know what they did? They added mirrors so people can look at themselves, when they're waiting for the elevator. And what happened? All the complaints evaporated. It was a very cheap change. And why is this so important? We're actually always talking about, in many teams, mostly about solutions, but we have to really be careful. Whenever we pick something up, we have to start with the problem, and actually not just start with the problem. You need to have sufficient context that you can potentially reframe the problem. And that's an even higher bar, right? So it's not just you have to have a problem, you have to have sufficient understanding that you can reframe it if you wanted to. So being able to reframe means three things. You've got a problem you're trying to solve in the first place. Sometimes it's the only way of solving the problem. And then you can also validate the solution. Very simple. So that's where you should start. Very simple. Start feeding teams with sufficient context. They need to have all the information to make decisions. And that means you need to start with the problems. So you need to give teams important problems to solve. When they have context, they can be accountable for the results because they understand what they're doing and why it matters. And then if they have sufficient context, they also understand, hey, we're solving this problem. This is how it fits with the customer and the business. And very often when you talk to teams, that's not the case, unfortunately. And yeah, so once you supply teams with context, this messy reality that I showed you, this beautiful linear depiction is not true, right? Then you can actually have adaptation because you can make decisions in the moment. The teams have sufficient understanding and authority to make decisions. Now, the second obstacle, inadequate autonomy. So this is actually pretty common. So you've got a team, they're trying to do work, but they're unable to do work because actually they need to talk to 3 other teams, or maybe they need to talk to a stakeholder outside of the team. So they're actually unable to do the work, and then you don't get the results you want. So actually, this is the real team. You know what I mean? The real team is outside the team. And then they cannot make decisions, they cannot take action, and they're always busy waiting. They're always busy waiting for others. So that's the next step. And if you have inadequate autonomy, what you're going to see is lots of waiting, lots of inaction. Teams must coordinate with many other teams. They can make decisions because they're always depending on other team, or they're scared to make decisions. So this is actually also pretty common. How you solve this, you need to create the conditions for autonomy. So you need to have teams, ideally, right? In a perfect world, they can ship stuff independently. They have all the expertise necessary to make decisions. They have trust and psychological safety. So it's not just expertise or being cross-functional, but also the environment. And then they will take decisive action. And the third obstacle is lack of collaboration. So you have got many sub-teams that are actually working towards something. They're not really collaborating. They're operating in silos. You've got maybe silos within the team. You've got maybe silos between teams. And then you have lack of collaboration. So you will see that everybody works on their subtasks completely independently. Sorry, not even subtasks. Like they're horizontally sliced stories. When you need help from another team, you don't get it. You have bottlenecks within your team, right? Yeah, we didn't release it because QA is slow. So these are all symptoms of lack of collaboration. And what to stress collaboration is not only within the teams, it's also between the teams. So you want ideally teams that are effectively collaborating. So they're producing vertical slices of value together. They're pair programming or mob programming, but they're not working in silos. They receive help when they need it. And if there's a bottleneck within the team or outside the team, like they help each other as necessary. And the fourth obstacle is, and now we're getting more in the organization, is insufficient alignment. So teams have no clue what other teams are working on. You just go to a team and ask them, what are the teams doing? I don't know. And when teams do need help from each other, there's a big fight because it's unclear what the priority is. You also see teams are working on too many different things at once because everything is important. And yeah, you just have lots of competing interests that make collaboration difficult. So basically kind of like looks like this. We're all over the place, pulling in different directions. That's actually what you don't want. So you want to have focus and clarity, right? Teams know what other teams are working on. You can only achieve that if you're not on working too many different things at once, you know? And when teams need help, it's quietly and quickly resolved because it's clear what's most important. There is a product vision, there is a strategy, there's a clear roadmap, there's an order backlog, and everybody is pulling in the same direction. And if you don't do that, you've got chaos, cannibalization, and conflict, right? You want to have teams of teams collaborating with each other. And now we're getting to the biggest obstacle, and that's actually what I call the Kraken, the counterproductive organizational system. So the Kraken is this monster you may have seen in the Pirates of the Caribbean with all these tentacles. And yeah, companies that have too many departments, they have all these corporates, waterfall mindset, culture where people don't want to make decisions and blame each other, huge organizations, lots of process, many rules, bureaucracy, like all these factors influence the size of your Kraken, aka your counterproductive organizational system. And yeah, what you tend to see, right? Organizations, startups, small, they don't really have a Kraken, right? They're not the tentacles. But then as they become older, it slowly begins to grow. You get more processes, more rules, more departments. And then until the end, you've got a monster of an organization where even teams struggle to get the simplest things done. So this is actually the Delta monster, right? So this is the big reveal. Like the Delta, the reason why people join companies are completely surprised is because there is a Kraken with all its tentacles over all the departments and all the way of working. But you only notice that when you start working somewhere. So what actually happens in many organizations, they're just busy feeding the Kraken. They're not busy delivering value. They're doing work that's necessary because the Kraken asks for it. And when that happens is you're not busy thinking about customers, users in the business. And why is that so important? It's because the bottom of the delta is the counterproductive organizational system. It's the constraint. It's the base of the pyramid. If you don't fix problems there, the Kraken is going to pull you back. It's going to impact your autonomy, your context, your alignments. Unless you think about the systemic issues that produce all these behaviors and problems, you're going to end up all your changes being reverted. I've been there. So what does making fighting the Kraken difficult? There are many reasons for it. First of all, the longer you are part of a system, the more blind you become to the problems. So there's this Dutch saying, the beam of the lighthouse doesn't shine underneath the ground of the lighthouse. That definitely applies in organizations. You just get used to the way of working. You know, it's kind of like that couch that has this little hole in it. It feels comfortable, you know, but actually it's all damaged. Another problem is the moment you have a big organization, you've got basically a big tree where nothing can grow under. So the same problems that make it very difficult to make decisions that suffocate the teams and cause struggles, that also applies to changing the system itself. That same bureaucracy that is present makes it very difficult to change the system because they're going to apply that same bureaucracy to the changes for the system. The other problem is, the third reason why it's so difficult is organizations do not evolve for the future. They have evolved based on conditions of the past. So a very good example is from Lego, right? So you see this dinosaur standing on Lego, probably getting his feet hurt. But dinosaurs did not evolve to survive the impact of a meteor. They're evolved based on the past. Lego almost went bankrupt in the beginning of 2000s. You want to know why? It's because they always had a lot of money. Things were always going well. They were actually not tracking the profit of a Lego set. They didn't know how much a Lego set cost. So they were actually losing a lot of money, because when you make a Lego piece, you need to mold, like a cast. They cost like 100K. You know what I mean? So $100,000. And so if you make a little Indiana Jones whip, for example, and you put it in a set, you're losing $100,000. And it becomes very cheap if you reuse it over multiple sets. But they were not doing that. And why were they not doing that? It's because they always were making a lot of money. So this is the other thing to watch out for. And the fourth thing I think we've all seen before, the organizational system will fight back to preserve the status quo. It doesn't want you to change stuff. People are in their departments. They want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their bonuses. And yeah, on the right, you see a very lovely quote from John Gall. Like, the moment you set up a system, you find yourself consumed in feeding. And this is actually related to technical systems, but I think it even more applies to bureaucracies and large organizations. So the fifth reason is, and this is just human nature, we suck at removing and we hate losing what we have. So there's two different reasons. There's just a lot of scientific research. If you give people a puzzle and there are two ways to solve it, either adding two pieces or removing two pieces, people choose for adding the two pieces. And yeah, it's just a natural phenomenon. Organizational bloat increases because entropy increases. So we don't remove stuff. And yeah, the sixth reason is, even experts can tell you how to fix. I couldn't tell you how to fix, like, because the problem is it's a complex system. You cannot predict everything, Here's a very nice example. So on the right, you see the sugarcane toad. So that was introduced in Australia because the biologists thought, hey, we've got a problem with the sugarcane profits because they're being eaten by sugarcane beetles. So let's introduce a toad to eat those beetles. Well, there was only one problem. The toad never ate any of the beetles, but it ate everything else that fit in its mouth. So now they have an ecological disaster in Australia. They still have it. Because the experts thought it was a good idea. And that's, I think, is the key thing. It's your context, your situation. Like, you need to do experiments because Australia is very different than the Antarctic. There isn't one size that fits all. A good example of this is, they actually did this. So what they did is they introduced wolves to Yellowstone. So what do you think happens when you introduce wolves to Yellowstone? Do you get more beavers or fewer beavers? Please write in the chat. I see someone raising their eyebrows. It's okay, right? So even experts don't know the answer to this one. So actually the result is more beavers. Why is that? It's because organizations are complex. So this is visualized as a beautiful, linear, predictive thing, which suggests causation. But if you introduce wolves again, you might not get the same result. So they actually introduced more wolves. So what happens? The elk, they moved more during the winter, which means more young willows survive during the winter, which means more beavers survive because they eat these young willows. So who would have seen this coming? Nobody, But afterwards, you can explain it, but it's non-deterministic. It's not predictable. So the most important point I want to tell you is, even experts can predict. Before you mistake me, you still need experts. Experts are crucial, but they need to run experiments. They will not tell you something like safe is not going to work, precisely for this reason. So the most important thing I want to tell you is, don't copy paste wolves in your organization. Like, unless you're Australia unless you're Yellowstone Park, you're that exact park, it doesn't mean it's going to work. And maybe even if you were to introduce them again, it wouldn't even work there. You need to do experiments. Also, the product operating model, it's not something you copy paste. It's principles. You may need to make it your own in your organization. So we need to get away from this tendency to copy paste stuff because it doesn't fix our problems. And yeah, the most important thing I think which is missing is we need leaders with more guts, like people that dare to chop off the tentacles of the Kraken, who dare to remove stuff. And that's incredibly scary. And yeah, and the problem is, when you don't do that over time, it becomes even more scary. So on the top right, you see Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs, actually, this is a story very few people know about Apple, but it actually played one of the most important roles in their success. So when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, he spoke to every executive to figure out how is your company doing, right? So he spoke to the first executive. Everything's going great. Our P&L is black, so positive. We're making money. Blah, blah, blah. We're working on amazing things. The second person, the same. We're doing amazing. Life is great. The third, until he arrived at the 10th. There was only one problem. Apple was losing billions of dollars per year. So it was impossible that every department was making money. But you know what happened? They were all busy fighting each other and doing cost allocation games. So everybody was on paper making a profit. So what did Steve Jobs do? He put them all on a single profit and loss statement, a single P&L. They still have that to this day because there was a lawsuit where Apple was sued basically for the App Store. And they asked, how much money does the App Store make? And they responded, we don't know because we're on a single P&L. So it still applies today. And what I also wanted to tell you is the team level, you need to absolutely fix that. Like you can create pockets of goodness there, but it's ultimately easy and inadequate. Like the bottleneck ultimately is not the team. It's at a higher level usually, unless you're working at a very small company. It's in the organization, the way of working, the way you do road mapping, the way you do budgeting. And unless you propagate those changes to higher levels, when you leave the company, all those changes are going to be undone. So if you remember two things from this talk, the first thing would be complex systems, changing them is incredibly hard. Nobody can tell you what to do. And we all love processes and guidebooks and reading books to tell us these are all the steps you must follow. But yeah, if that were the case, it's not a complex system anymore. And a good example of this is Australia. Australia has 200 million rabbits. They actually introduced multiple viruses where they eradicated 99% of the population. They actually built a 3,000-kilometer rabbit fence. They introduced cats. They did all kinds of things, but they're still there. There are still 200 million rabbits there. And a bad system is going to beat a good person every time. Like you can forget about it. And yeah, I hope this model will help. So the 5 obstacles to empower teams. It's a nice acronym, cacao. You can use it to cook the Kraken. So visualize that nice mug of hot chocolate with the Kraken inside and talk about those different levels. Definitely start at the top levels, create a pocket of goodness, create this small, get these quick wins. But unless you move up towards collaboration or alignment like OKRs, roadmaps, vision and strategy, you will not have a fighting chance. So thank you very much. Feel free to send any questions you might have to maarten@dalmijn.com. I always answer unless I forget. And if I forget, you can nudge me. And thank you very much. Very curious.
Awesome, Maarten. That was really cool. So we have 18 minutes left in our slot here. So let's have a little discussion. Are there any questions?
I'm a little bit surprised, at least what I see in my experience. You didn't mention anything about management as an obstacle to empowered teams. And to me, that's at the top of the list. There's too many leaders that just can't keep their hands off of the teams. They're stuck in the development and they don't allow them to make any decisions for fear that it's going to get placed back on them. How do you address that?
So, I think this is part of the organizational system, right? I didn't add leaders as separate part, a separate topic. So I think that's one of the challenges. I think there rarely is just one reason, you know what I mean? So you need to understand why are these dynamics happening? And the Apple example I gave, the reason why that was happening is because all those executives had bonuses tied to their department success. So they didn't care about other departments. They didn't give a shit about it. All they cared about is how do I make sure that my department looks good on paper because then I get a bonus.
Localization versus system.
So there isn't one reason, and that's the hard part. When you ask me a question like this, it really depends on why is that behavior happening. Is there an unsafe environment? So are people scared to make decisions? That's definitely something that needs to be fixed, right? But how do you say? Do you have 10 departments? Like, do you have BPOs and TPOs and business analysts? So basically, responsibility is diluted over way too many people. These are all there isn't one cause. You know what I mean? And that's the hard part. And unless someone takes a look and says, "Hey, we need to really remove stuff," because that's the key thing. You don't fix these things by adding more people or adding more process or introducing a scaling framework unless we remove stuff and really have teams that are like closer to the work and closer to the value, you're never going to fix it. But yeah, I cannot give an answer like you must do this. I'm just saying like these different layers will help you to see where are problems happening. Like, first of all, do teams have context, right? That's already great. Like, can they make decisions? Like, do they have the expertise as part of the team? No, they don't. Okay, so what are the things that are causing that? So you can go through these layers, and I can tell you one thing: the stuff at the top is usually easier to fix at the bottom. The moment you go down, the moment you go into alignment, for example, then you're already going into what does finance care about? What does sales care about? And then you're going down this rabbit hole where life becomes extremely complicated because you have institutionalized competing interests, right? Everybody has their own interest, their own perspective. Companies also hire for specific expertise. So the finance people, they're only expert in finance. They don't know how it fits with the rest of the org, So you get tunnel vision, and then you cannot collaborate anymore. So I'm going on a bit of a rant to paint a picture, right? But it's hard. Let me know if it resonates,
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks.
Are there any more questions? Does someone want to share like, hey, this is familiar, like, or unfamiliar?
Yeah, hi Maarten.
Hey, John,
How's it going, man?
how's it going? Good, man. How are you? Had a good time in
Doing
Hawaii?
Oh, it's fantastic. I can't believe I'm back. But also, yeah, you should take a look at the spreadsheet. There are a couple of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I can repeat the questions, right? No problem. So there's a move away from frameworks now, going towards reusable pattern libraries to experiment with. What's your opinion about those? Try and make your own system that works approach. I think that's great. I think that's exactly what we should be doing. I mean, it's good to be inspired by patterns and try to see if they work, because that's the key thing. Do they work in your context, with your team, your level of expertise? So I think that's really good. So I think the moment you have adopt this whole bundle of things, I mean, I'm not even talking about Scrum now, but something like OKRs, then there's this tendency to think about how does the OKR framework work versus how is it serving our needs? And I think that's the key thing always. How is it helping us? And yeah, people just seem to get stuck in this framework obsession, and that's very dangerous. And I think you should always prevent that, because the point is never to follow the rules. The point is to produce productive outcomes, and the rules help to do that. So they're like not the most important thing. Yes. Can you provide an example of an OKR that fits, improves with team autonomy and context? Yeah, I mean, very simple. If you join a company, you just go through the product backlog and you see, if I read this, do I have sufficient context to reframe the problem? Is there even a problem? Is there the context to reason about different solutions? And then you say, hey, we would like 80% of our tickets or 90% of our issues, like whatever the percentage is, when I open it, there should be a clear problem we're trying to solve. Regarding autonomy, how do you say? I think the key thing there is something like cycle time. Like if you have teams that lack autonomy, you're going to see a high cycle time because they're waiting for other teams, they're waiting for decisions. So probably you can have a metric to improve the cycle time. But yeah, those are just some of the things from the top of my head. But good question.
One that was going through my mind is simple. So you suggested 5 mission critical issues here. Given that you typically have limited time or capacity as someone who wants to change things, is there one you would say, okay, usually that's my first pick?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to start at the top. Like I tend to start with the context and autonomy, because the reason is you need to get to know the system, right? And if you're working with a team, you slowly get to know the system, you get to understand the problems, and then you start to move up. I think it's very difficult to start at the bottom because, how do you say, I think one of the other reasons which I didn't mention, management is usually too far removed from the work to see the problems. You know what I mean? And one of the benefits I have is that I work with teams, so I see the problems, and then you can see how the problems relate to the system or to the management or to the budgeting. So I would very much start at the top, but then at some point you will notice, hey, I'm being constrained by things. You know what I mean? Like there's a bottleneck. For example, how we do budgeting is screwing up like our roadmap. We're actually not working on the most, and then you start tackling those things. But yeah, it's kind of like technical debt, right? Spaghetti. Like sometimes you get there are all these interrelated things, and where do you even start? And that's the hard part.
Oh, we have another one.
Oh,
Oh, awesome. How do you secure buy-in from top leadership for empowering teams? What is the best way to initiate this shift and ensure C-level executives
yeah,
actively support it?
yeah. I mean, I think the crucial thing there is there are two things I always say. First, build relationships. You know what I mean? Like if you immediately go in a room to pitch with people who don't know you, you have to change complete way of working completely without knowing them, without understanding what they care about. That's what I've seen very often happen, right? Like it's not going to succeed. So I would tend to start with like more like a, I mean, this sounds negatively, but divide and conquer approach. Start with one person, ask what do you care about, what do you concerned about, and meet the different people and try to form a mental model. Like what does the salesperson care about? What does finance care about? What keeps them up at night? And then you can think about how can I pitch, what I care about in a way that they care about. And sometimes you can't even do that, right? And that's really hard. But let's imagine you can do that. Then I think it always makes a lot of sense to tell a story. Like this elevator example, I showed you that intentionally because everybody knows elevators. And everybody knows that this problem with the elevator, you can literally have a workshop, right? Can you solve this problem if you don't understand, uh, how do you say, if you don't reframe the problem? No, you can't. So you have to have a problem to begin with. And then you can talk about, hey, how do we currently work? Like you just open it, like, what's the problem why are we doing this? Nobody knows. And then you can start talking about that. And I think, yeah, most important thing is let people experience it. It's very hard to convince people by telling them this is how you must do it because we're all stubborn, I'm very stubborn at least. And yeah, let them experience it.
Okay, we have another question. In some organizations, leadership doesn't even realize that there is a Kraken. How can you help them see for what it is?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely true. Like if you have an organization that's so big, that's far removed from the teams, I mean, I think then give examples, like just show how difficult, like we're working on this. Do you think it should be difficult or easy? Like it should be easy, and then show all the hoops, show all the problems. I don't think the problem is that they don't care. It could be, right? But most of the time, I think it's just because they don't know. They don't know because they're so far removed from the teams in these big organizations. And show it to them, and then talk about, okay, so this is and yeah, like I said before, if you understand what they care about, then you can talk in terms of language they understand. And that's also very hard because what you tend to see is the higher they get, like if in these big organizations, they care about very abstract things, like P&L and profit, and yeah, how do you relate that to what the team is doing? You know what I mean? So it's not easy.
In my experience, C-level leaders often struggle to talk about problems, prefer to jump straight into solution mode, typically focusing on their own priorities. How do you get them to first acknowledge and align with on the core problem, ensuring a shared understanding before moving towards solutions?
I think this is where liberating structures shine, right? I think if you either have, so there are two situations where I think liberating structures are great. I mean, there are many other situations, but there are two. For example, let's say you have a team where people are really introverted. Liberating structures are awesome, right? Because otherwise you have a meeting, you ask them, and they're like silent. But the other thing is, if you have very dominant people, who immediately jump to the conclusions, you facilitate the meeting and you start with, hey, like, what do you think the problem is we're trying to solve here? Or what is the problem? And then this person will see, hey, there are people that have very different interpretations of what the problem is. The risk there as well, Stefan, is sometimes you have people that are just uncurable and they will just still say, my problem is the problem and this is this is the solution. And yeah, but then we have a different problem. That person is the problem.
Which leads us back to the old consulting adage, there's A, always a problem, and B, it's always people. So, by all means, yes. So I think we have time for another question. So if you're fast, there's someone. which organizations are best at taming the Kraken?
That's a good question, right? So this is also something I wanted to ask to you, right? I mean, who has ever worked at an organization where you've that has slayed the Kraken? And I can tell you one thing. Of course, I know many companies in the Netherlands that are famous for their agile transformations, but they have not slayed the Kraken. It's all window dressing, agile dressing, if I may call it. Like all these Dutch banks that are doing Spotify model and agile, it's a complete lie. Like at least I can tell you that there are whole departments like not doing anything remotely close to agile, and I don't know the success stories, to be frank. That's why I'm actually making this model and talking about it, because I think what we're doing isn't working, and that's that's the whole point.
Maybe it's also the reason why Laloux's book, Reinventing the Organizations, are relatively thin. There are not so many listed. So hire, of course, comes immediately to mind. But
so hire, of course, is a good example. But what I don't know is, because I'm not familiar enough with them, is did they gradually evolve toward this setup, or were they a bloated mammoth? You know what I mean? Like a huge organization that's cut off the tentacles, and I don't know. So does anybody have examples? Desperate ones, yeah, that's true. So that's I think maybe it's the same as with humans, right? So what you tend to see, for example, I should go to the gym more often, and then let's say I have a health problem, then suddenly there's a sense of urgency. Let's do it, right? So, and then you're suddenly going to do it. Maybe there needs to be a sense of urgency, but I think that's also a leadership thing. I think good leaders can instill a sense of urgency, right? Like, so then we get to the leadership again.
It is an interesting topic. And I'm afraid we're not going to solve it today. But
maybe it's an age thing. So here's a remark from Monique.
Age thing.
People that actually have and trust in agile mindset might not be at upper management yet. Maybe, right? I mean, what I can say is, like, organizations evolve based on the mindsets of the past, right? So all these organizations that are hundreds of years old, agile didn't exist. Like there was much more Taylorism. So that's also how those organizations are set up.
Special education. I mean, they still teach the crap at business schools.
Yeah.
True. And I mean, the whole case study approach from Harvard, for example, it always says, okay, there's a situation A, and then there's an optimal solution.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, do you think this is in the current environment still applicable? Because there is this mental model, this need. Okay, I paid for an education, I believe maybe recency effect or whatever, and I come back to the solutions I consider to be useful, and probably those were solutions I had as a homework, because I can recall them, and you try to shoehorn the current problem into that solution.
I think that's also caused by a lot of these people, business schools, like at least what I've seen, some of them even teach when they've never worked at a company, you know what I mean? And that I think is troublesome, because it's good that you do research, but
good company, so there are many politicians who have never worked in their life, but telling other people actually how to live their life.
So Bart shares some anecdotal evidence that female leaders tend to focus on making others successful and solving problems more than on their own success and tooting their ego. Could very well be. I find it hard to comment. It's always dangerous territory to talk about these things.
Okay, a final one. Do you have 2 minutes left?
Yes.
Okay, so do you think we often misunderstand human behavior by assuming logic alone will solve problems, when in reality people, especially leaders, make decisions based on emotions, biases, and other non-logical factors? How can we account for this when driving change?
Yeah, I mean, this boils down to what I said before. Before you try to convince people, you need to know them and not just know what they care about. Like, what they care about is not just what they care about from a business perspective, but also do they prefer pictures? Do they prefer text? Like, do they, what kind of appeal will convince them? Is it data? Is it an emotional appeal? You know what I mean? And I don't think logic always is the best way to move forward, because some people just don't think that way. So sometimes, for example, I knew, for example, let me give you a concrete example. So I worked at a company, and they wanted to implement end-to-end testing, and we had all of these logical reasons why it was important, and it was presented, and the business said, or the leader said, we're not going to do this. I don't see the value. And then I told them, okay, wait, there's going to be a production issue. We're going to lose a lot of money. And then when that happens, then we tell them, look, this is the solution to the production issue. This would have prevented it. And yeah, and that happened, of course, 1 month later. And then it was like, we have to do end-to-end testing. It's going to solve all our problems. So yeah, so sometimes, yeah, that can also help, these kind of things.
Maarten, that was excellent. Thank you very much. It was an exciting talk, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your new framework and approach. I really like the idea with the Kraken and a pot of cacao. And yeah, let's see where we can take it.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.